Coming up on Regarding Men, varieties of rape fraud and the media's narrative.
Hey there! Welcome to Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die. I'm Janice Fiamengo. I'm the author of the Fiamengo File, and I'm joined by my good friends Paul Elam of paulelam.com and Tom Golden of Men Are Good.
Men are good.
And we're talking about a number of stories today, and they're loosely connected, as I hope we will show. The first one is a fascinating story out of Oxford, England, and it's the story of a woman, an Oxford lawyer, who tried her darndest to destroy a man's life, to ruin his reputation, to destroy his livelihood, and to essentially, well, end any possibility of a career or happiness for the guy by accusing him, first of all, of sexual harassment, of threats, of rape, ultimately of a kidnapping attempt, which she staged, and a stabbing, a vicious stabbing, which she did to herself. She was finally convicted, and the headline of the story in a local Oxford paper says that she was given a life sentence, which I'm not quite sure why it says that. We can talk about that later, but it is a significant sentence. She's sentenced to prison for a minimum of 4 years. And which I think I'd have to say this is probably maybe the first case I've ever seen of false allegations where the punishment even somewhat fit the crime. It's probably also the first story about a convicted false allegationist where we didn't hear that this was a terrible thing because it was going to prevent other victims from coming forward. There are still some peculiarities in the telling of the story, and we'll get to those, but it wasn't as bad. I think I'd have to say it was probably the best article I've ever read on the conviction of a woman for making a false allegation. And in her case, it wasn't just one false allegation, it was multiple bizarre attempts at framing this man. Okay, so we'll deal with that first. Then we're also going to move to a couple of stories that have to do with something, and I don't think I'd ever heard of this before, that feminists call rape fraud or rape by deception. The two stories are one case of a New York Times op-ed, a very recent one, by a law professor at the University of Michigan, who is claiming that the law should recognize something called rape by deception or rape fraud, which is a case where a woman consents to sex with a man, fully consents, but she consents under false pretenses of various sorts, it's suggested. The case that's given, the example that's given in the story is a man who says he's not married, and it turns out he is married. So she can retroactively then take this man, to court, claiming that she was actually raped because the circumstances under which she consented were fraudulent. It's a really bizarre article, but this law professor is taking it very seriously, and I think we should too, especially since the second story that we're looking, or the third story, but the second story in this category is a story of a man in Israel, a non-Jewish man, a Muslim man, who was actually convicted of rape by deception because the woman claimed she thought he was Jewish. And when she found out that he was an Arab, she went to the police, and he was actually charged with rape by deception. And so we'll discuss that bizarre story. It's an old story from 2010, but it shows that this idea has been around for a while. And I can see why feminists would find it a very attractive one. Yes. So lots to discuss, lots of weird things to discuss. So let's move back to the first story then, which is this series of false allegations made by a woman named Aisha Ahmed, who accused a man named Iqbal Mohammed, who's also a lawyer. She'd had some sort of relationship with him. The story, I don't know whether we're to believe it or not, was that she didn't know he was married. She found out he was married, and she was so upset over this that she began this series of allegations. First of all, she claimed he was harassing her and threatening her. She created a false account, and sent harassing or threatening emails to herself. As a result of that, he spent some hours in jail until it was discovered that she herself had created the account. At that point, I think if she had said, okay, look, that was a bad idea of mine, I was just really upset, I think the whole thing would have gone away. Right. But she persisted. She kept on claiming that he was harassing her, threatening her, phoning her, stalking her, etc. So he decided, okay, I'm going to have her charged with harassment. And then in the time leading up to her court case, when she was going to have to stand trial for harassment, she escalated. She accused him of raping her at various times, and then just went completely crazy and staged this kidnapping and stabbing, and got an ex-boyfriend, Mustafa Hussein, to help her. And all sorts of people got involved, emailing her and texting her, claiming that this poor Muhammad fellow was the one behind this kidnapping attempt and stabbing. She actually stabbed herself apparently very gruesomely in the leg. And then while she was in the ambulance, she claimed that he had been the one, this Iqbal Muhammad, her ex-lover, had been the one who stabbed her. So this was a very determined woman. And fortunately for the man, I don't know why anyone would have believed anything she claimed after that initial false allegation, but it was taken seriously. All her claims were investigated, and the man spent more time in jail as a result of her allegations. So it's, well, if nothing else, it's certainly a lesson to any bystanders. Don't ever try to help out a woman who claims she's being harassed by a guy, as happened to the ex-boyfriend Hussein, whom she told, this horrible man was taking her to court and doing all sorts of awful things, and that he should help her out. Don't take it seriously. The lengths to which certain women will go when spurned are extraordinary.
Yes. Yeah, extraordinary is exactly the word. I mean, this woman went through everything you could imagine to try and get this guy. I mean, all this relational aggression, she just pulled every trick in the book, and would not give up. Obviously, a bright woman, but obviously not bright at the same time. Jeez, a flip, just absolutely incredible. But the thing that strikes me about this article and this whole circumstance is that this woman actually got 4.5 years prison sentence. I mean, it's like, wow, someone falsely accused who actually has a sentence. And that they said discretionary life sentence, which apparently is more, it's not a real sentence itself, a life sentence, but it's well discretionary. We'll give her 4.5 and we'll see what happens after that. I think that's the way it works, but still 4.5 years.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive,
Yeah. And the judge actually did say, this is a very serious crime. There was none of that stuff about how this is going to prevent other victims from coming forward.
Right,
and
right.
that's why it's a serious crime. You've really committed a crime against rape victims. He didn't say that. There is some weird stuff about the woman as victim, but primarily the judge said your actions were evil.
Yes. He literally used those words, I think.
He literally used that word.
Yeah.
And the harm done to this man is extraordinary. Like, that was fully recognized by the judge in the judge's words and in the sentence that she was given. So for that reason, this is a really noteworthy case, I think.
Yes. And
it's a departure from the norm, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The typical disposition of cases like this. One thing that was missing from the story, or it may have been that I just didn't see it because I did scour as much as I could looking for it, is what to become of the ex-boyfriend who not only supported her, but participated in the scam. He wasn't just somebody who was giving her moral support as she was going through a legal trial. He actually phoned in threats on her behalf. But I couldn't find anything in the story because this guy needs to be in jail too.
Yeah.
I think if I'm remembering correctly, he got a suspended sentence and he was charged as a co-conspirator in an attempt to pervert the course of justice. So I don't whether one considers that adequate or not. It's hard to know because I think she had lied to him as well. And told him that she was absolutely being persecuted by this abusive man. And so maybe he thought he was doing the right thing, but I mean, he must have known it wasn't. He bought a phone in the other man's name and, used it, all this stuff. I mean, he needed his head examined. I suppose in his defense, one could say he was doing the chivalric thing. He thought he was helping out this woman who was being persecuted by a terrible man. But so he was charged and convicted, but I don't think he'll spend any time in jail.
Probably not.
But that's a shame. But
the other amazing thing, go ahead, Paul.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. The other amazing thing about this article is that, here we've got an article that you have to applaud and say, wow, that's actually good news for what we believe in. But at the same time, this particular article was written in such a way as to hold the perpetrator up and to make her look as good as possible and kind of ignore the victim. And it's really interesting. Let's look at a couple of the clips from this. Here's what she says. Her being jilted during the course of her relationship with Mr. Muhammad was a trigger. It's very much like the young child who cried wolf. She's now a woman who was driven to concoct false allegations of rape and has been found out. She's been driven. She's made herself vulnerable to future abuse like a young child. I mean, what?
Oh, yes, he's the one that's vulnerable.
They're comparing her to a young child. It's like, wow. Can you believe that? This is the perpetrator. This is not the victim.
No, you can tell this is Erin Jane Prosser who wrote this, and you can tell that she's furious that this woman got in trouble for what she did. She is doing everything she can to pull this crazy bitch out of the fire, journalistically speaking.
Yes.
And that seems to be the agenda. She doesn't like the outcome of this trial at all.
I think you're right. I think the other thing is that Miss Prosser, I believe, is very young. And it may be one of her first assignments. Who knows? But what tickles me is there's probably a battle going on between the editor who wrote the headline and the writer who writes the copy for the article itself, because the two are completely different. Oxford lawyer given life sentence, and then all of the stuff that she comes up with is like, oh my gosh. She has an inability to cope with rejection and feelings of betrayal, but it is likely that this behavior is a coping mechanism as a result of her diagnosis of emotionally unstable personality disorder.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know what that means, emotionally unstable personality disorder is another way to say borderline.
Yes.
Well, and I'm assuming that... Sorry, Paul, I didn't hear that.
No, I just said I'm so shocked that she turned out to be BPD. It just, who would have imagined?
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And we got to say, this just needs to be said. There's a lot of lessons in this. I do think it's a great story in that finally a false accuser getting some kind of severe comeuppance for their behavior. The article does at least reveal what we already know, that she's crazy. But there's another moral here that we can't miss out on. And guys, don't stick your dick in crazy.
Yes.
Just don't do it. This is
danger.
This guy was this close to being incarcerated himself.
Well,
Had she
that's
not
it.
been so sloppy with her story and so openly, transparently false with what she was doing, this guy could have ended up in prison for 10 or 15 years.
Like many other men are now.
Like many men are now. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good point, because I was thinking that, okay, well, maybe she's smart at some level, but I was thinking she also is extremely naive to think that she could, first of all, create a false email account and email herself threats, and that wouldn't be found out by investigators. I mean, even I know that would not work if you were trying it. And so, I mean, if she had just stuck to the false rape allegations, which she followed up that initial attempt to claim he was harassing her, that's very difficult to disprove, isn't it? If she had stuck to a credible sounding story, the man might well be in jail.
Yes.
It's sobering to think that he was essentially saved from that by the clumsiness of her own, and really the fanaticism of her own attempts to frame him.
And arrogance. She thought she had gynocentrism on her side and nothing would stop her.
And
Seems
guess
like
what?
it.
In any other scenario, she's absolutely right. I mean, I have no doubt that this woman pushed this and pushed it and pushed it because she was operating with a sense of impunity. She didn't believe for a minute that any harm was going to come to her. And in fact, I am sure she believed that everybody would circle the wagons around her, take in her story lock, stock, and barrel, and go persecute this man for her. And had it not been for a couple of factors, that probably would have happened.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If she involved other people, which was a big mistake because they eventually confessed. I don't think she, as far as I could understand from the story, I don't think she ever confessed. And that's the other thing. If she had right away at the beginning, if she'd said, okay, forget it, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done that, I'm sorry, it would not have been pursued. And then she wouldn't have been driven to concoct further and more radical schemes. And I think right up until the very end, she was still denying that she had done any of this, which is why I suspect the sentence is fairly harsh, because she doesn't show any remorse or even any awareness of what she has done, really. And I suspect a lot of that stuff about how and I think you were going to put up a bit more of it there, Tom. I think that's all the defense lawyers' narrative about how she's suffering and how terrible this is for her, and how she had this personality disorder, and that's why she did it and all that. But I thought it was hilarious, all this stuff about her past. We didn't really need to be told that she, worked so hard to get her law degree. There it is. She stayed up night after night and condensed a 2-year course into just a year. She qualified, a cause of great celebration and joy. Nothing is worse than when a gift is given and cruelly taken away, and she has to live with that. I mean, really, it's and as you said, Tom, maybe this is the youthfulness and lack of experience of the actual reporter, but it's not completely out of left field, because we've seen over and over again this tendency to paint female perpetrators as victims. And so, this young woman writer is just following in that trend. But it is just ridiculous that we should be asked to sympathize with this vicious and unstable woman who tried in so many different ways to destroy this man's life.
I think if you
I think we could also pretty much bank on the fact that you could take almost any second wave feminist, people in their 70s now, and they would have said the same thing. This is a narrative. I agree with Tom that probably the transparency of it, the absence of mindfulness about what she was saying, could very well be attributed to youth. But this is the same rhetoric we would have gotten from Andrea Dworkin.
And the only difference is that the more mature feminists are more subtle. They say the same thing, they're just more subtle. This one can't, she hasn't learned to be subtle yet. I mean, that's just crazy stuff that's being said. Remember, this is about the perpetrator. What's that?
I don't know who's going to teach her to be more subtle. It won't be other feminists.
Well, we can help a little bit. She lost her career.
Get that from us.
She approached her studies fastidiously and meticulously. I mean, it's like, you just can't make this stuff up. It's just unbelievable.
I have to say, though, that at least The report did, I mean, there was a short paragraph about Mr. Muhammad and his suffering, but at least it was there. I have read reports of false allegations and of the punishments of those women who made the false allegations where there was nothing said at all about the man, and where the main emphasis was on how this was a crime against women because it would make it difficult for rape victims to come forward in future. So at least it didn't do that, and it honestly reported what the judge had said about the heinousness of the crime. So I was satisfied to that degree anyway. But yeah, you're right. It's just bizarre reading all about how, and now she's turned to prayer. She's taking comfort in her religion. She prays 5 times a day. Well, I don't really want to be asked to sympathize with this woman in any way. And it is just ridiculous that we have all those paragraphs about her pain and suffering.
Yes, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Indeed. Should we go to the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Let's go to the next one. Let's see. What are we going to do here? Seems to me that's the New York Times article, right?
Yes. So this is assistant professor of law at the University of Michigan trying to spin some crazy idea about rape by deception or rape fraud. She says legal scholars have long debated this question. Well, it's true that some feminist scholars certainly have been very interested in widening and broadening the category of what can be counted as rape. I mean, we know that, and this has had renewed impetus in the Me Too era. But it's not a coherent argument in any way. This Summers, it's astounding to me that somebody can have a law degree, which I thought required some degree of rigorous analytical thinking, and write an article like this, where she says that being duped, as she puts it, into having sex with somebody because the guy in this case, the example she gives, claimed he wasn't married, but actually he was, or it could be expanded to various other kinds of scenarios, I guess, that is in some way similar to a doctor telling a patient that a certain kind of surgery is required and giving an explanation that is actually false, and then going ahead and doing the surgery that wasn't required. She gives that as a parallel example, or a police officer lying to somebody, claiming that they have to search a house under, with a certain rationale for why they have to search your home. You give consent, and then it turns out that rationale was a false one. These are contractual kinds of situations where obviously the lie invalidates legally the consent that's given, and she tries to make the case that that's the same as in a sexual erotic relationship if you've in some way been lied to. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. I mean, I don't even know how to begin, and I can't imagine the kinds of situations that it might be applied to. To what extent would feminists be willing to allow women to go to retroactively redefine a woman's yes as actually a no? I mean, all that stuff that we were told for all those decades about yes means yes and no means no. Oh, it turns out that actually women can't be trusted to know what they want and to mean what they say. They should be allowed to say yes, and then if they discover something about the man that they don't like, they can say, oh, I consented under false pretenses and I want him charged with rape. And feminist legal scholars think that that's perfectly acceptable.
So the assumption is that women can't really make a good decision.
That's right.
And I would just wonder if maybe we should raise the age of consent for women to 30 or 40 or something like that, where they could make good decisions.
Like maybe they should get to know a man.
Is the horrible reality that this is precisely the intention of feminists. They want women to have the power to redefine every sexual interaction in
Right.
their lives
Right.
as an assault, as rape. So that
Yeah.
any time if the man displeases her or doesn't act in a way that's in accordance with her wishes, she can pick any intimate moment they had and say that was a rape. But I've got a question about that. I mean, I got to say, I've been to bed with a couple of women who looked one way with their makeup on, and
Yeah.
then the next morning I got an eye full of them without their makeup, and I felt raped. Does that mean
Exactly.
I can call the cops?
I think so, Paul. Why
I
not?
hope so.
You were
Good
cheated.
Lord.
Well,
You were cheated.
yeah.
Falsely led
Yes,
on.
I was
Yeah.
misled. I was
Yes.
absolutely deceived. I would not have slept with them if I knew what they really looked like.
That's it.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, that does touch a sore point for me because I used to wear quite a lot of makeup to hide rather bad skin when I was younger. But I had a friend actually who, and I understood her impetus to do this. She at least the first year of her relationship with the man that she eventually married. I don't suppose she continued the practice forever, but she wore her makeup to bed, got up afterwards and washed it off, and then always got up before he was awake to reapply it and to jump back into bed. So I guess she was very aware of, yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole can of worms to be opened there. Are we going to count push-up bras as deception? What happened to I'm on the pill when it turns out not to be? Is that going to be rape by deception? What if a woman lies about her age? Yeah, there's all sorts
Very
of
good point.
scenarios that could.
Yeah.
Of course,
God
people wrote
forbid women never lie about their marital status to have
right,
sex.
of course. No, they only do. Yeah, they might occasionally, but that's because they really need. Their needs aren't being met in the marriage, so they're justified in going outside. And it is interesting because a number of friends in the men's rights movement sent me this article saying, this might actually backfire on women, precisely thinking, what about women who claim that they're on the pill or use some form of birth control and it turns out that they don't, wouldn't that count then as rape by deception? But we know this would never be used against women. It would only be used against men, and that feminist advocates have always made that clear. I remember reading an article not too long ago, I think it was around 2010 or so, by a woman named Robin West, also a law professor, arguing that consensual but unwelcome sex should also be, if not criminalized, at least discussed as a category where the consent was, in some way questionable. So a woman who says yes but doesn't really want the sex, that is also not exactly consensual. So yeah, feminist legal scholars have been picking away at this notion of consent for ages and are just determined to find ways of trapping men, having men charge. I mean, this reminds me also of the 19th century when there was a whole category called seduction, which was also the retroactive redefining of consent. It was cases where a woman had consented, but then she would say later on that she had consented only because the man had promised to marry her. And then if he didn't come through on that promise, alleged promise, she would have him charged. And that was both a tort. She could take him to civil court. And it was also a legal category that he could be imprisoned for. So this is another version of that, in a way, retroactively redefining the woman's yes as a no.
Oh, it's a shame women just have no power whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, pretty scary stuff.
Indeed. Oh, gosh. Yeah,
so maybe we should go to the last story just to show a case of this in action.
Well, let's do that. There he is.
I really like this case because it puts it all in a nutshell. And as Janice mentioned earlier, this story, as you see on the screen there, is over 10 years old, but it is stuck in my mind for all these years. I remember it when the first story first came out, and I thought, how on earth do they get a conviction out of this? Because mind you, consider the circumstances. He was accused of rape by deception and convicted of it for allegedly telling the woman or making her believe that he was Jewish instead of Arab. He never said he was Jewish.
Right. She didn't
Nowhere
ask.
was it even alleged that, and she didn't ask him.
Right.
She was fucking him 15 minutes after they met. And I mean, I'm surprised she had time to hear his name before they were getting it on. And now she feels like afterwards, she felt like her honor. Tom, how was it again? You followed up on this and figured out how they caught the guy.
Yeah, they had no contact after that one tryst on top of the building. They went up to the roof of the building and had sex, and then never to be seen again. Well, 6 weeks later, the guy looks at his phone and he goes, "Who is that?" He couldn't figure out who this person was. And so he called the number, and it was her. And he said, "Hey, why don't we meet again?" Well, unfortunately, she said okay, but she never showed up. And then 3 days later, the police called him in for rape. So she caught him because he called back again. Oh, well.
So yeah, this was a case where they had met on the street. Within 15 minutes, they had sex together, and it wasn't until she realized sometime later that he was Arab rather than Jewish that she went to the police, and this was taken seriously enough and considered an example of this sort of rape by deception, in which the judge said that she would not have, she would not have cooperated if she hadn't thought that he was a Jewish man who was prepared to have a significant relationship. Wow,
Yeah.
maybe she should actually get to know the guy a little longer than 15 minutes before.
Indeed.
Yes,
Yeah.
Can we read this quote I'm going to read this quote from the judge because it's just precious. If the woman had not believed that the accused was a Jewish bachelor interested in a significant romantic relationship, she would not have cooperated. She cooperated in 15 minutes. And part of that was time it took them to get to the roof of the building. I mean, this was like, hello, my name's so-and-so. Do you want to have sex?
Yes.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
And that passed for the judge in the case. This passed for being her being deceived that he was interested in a serious relationship, a significant romantic relationship. Well, I'm sure it was significant in his day. On that day, apparently not. He didn't even remember who it was before he called her again.
Right. And once they called him in, they put him in jail for 2 months.
Yeah.
Waiting trial, and then after
jail
that they
for
put
2
an ankle
months.
bracelet for what, a year and a half, something like that.
Then convicted of this bizarre allegation. I mean, truly bizarre.
Yep.
And then under house arrest for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And then I guess eventually he must have appealed and won, because then I lose the threads of the story.
Yes.
Don't know what happened to him after that, but he must have had the conviction overturned on appeal. I mean, it's like one of those glimpses of something that one didn't even know existed. And maybe there's a whole series there must be other cases of allegations of rape by deception, maybe not of this exact kind of circumstance, but it must be a thing in Israel and perhaps in other countries as well. I didn't have time to actually investigate it. It'd be fascinating to do a follow-up to find out whether it is a legal category in any other countries and how many men have been convicted on that kind of charge. But it's very clear in that New York Times op-ed that this woman, she actually has a section of the article where she says, most people, if you ask them about this. Has this man committed a crime if he
Right.
claims to be unmarried, but he's actually married or whatever? Most people would say, no way, that's not rape. That
Right.
maybe it's not, it's unethical, but it isn't rape by any means. And she actually doesn't say it in so many words, but she basically says, but it should be a crime. And so
Right.
my job and the job of other feminist legal scholars is to make the case and convince people that men should go to jail for this, because I think it should be a legal category.
Yes.
And wow, that's pretty scary stuff.
And in the New York Times article, they talk about how the rape, was, oh gosh, now I've lost my train of thought. What was I thinking? Somebody take over. I'll come back.
Well, she says something like how this proves that we have an antiquated notion of what rape is. Is that what you were thinking of?
No, I was thinking that they equated this, quote, rape with fraud. Like in a
Yes.
business transaction. Okay,
Yeah,
so someone has a business transaction and they say, well, I'm going to give you $100,000. And they don't give you the $100,000. That's fraud.
Yeah.
And that's punishable, right?
Yeah.
But if someone says, okay, I've got $10 and they don't give you the $10, that's punishable, but punishable for $10 worth. So the question is, this is not really rape. This is fraud. And what is the thing that needs to be paid back? 15 minutes of displeasure? 15 minutes of pleasure?
Yeah.
How do you pay that back? Because it's not rape. That's just
Yeah.
not telling the exact truth. So it's just
Yeah.
they're mixing up the metaphors here. They're trying to smirch in this whole thing about calling it rape when really it's not rape. It is fraud in a way if you're misled. But what's the payment for that?
In other words, if it's fraud, then as you say, what is the thing that has been falsely purchased or
Yes.
gained?
What's the loss? What is the loss?
Yeah.
And
And
then
it
he
really
should pay
is-
back that loss, whatever that might be. That would be fair.
Yeah. So what is it? I mean, in a
But it ain't
In
10 years in
essence-
jail.
it's a feminist attempting to.
You have to find the loss. Yeah, I mean, you have to be able, even in a libel case or slander, you have to be able to pinpoint damages.
Exactly.
In a fraud case, you have to prove that a
Yes.
person lost something.
Yes.
There's nothing lost here. I mean, I understand, ladies, you commoditize the JJ. That attitude is prevalent, and you think it's a gift that you're giving somebody. Never mind,
Yeah.
it's something that you want to. So we've got all that. All this just strikes me as nonsense. And I do think it has to be said. I mean, in this last case, the guy is a Palestinian Arab, and it's in Israel. It's certainly the tensions in that region probably contributed to this sentence. But
Right.
I still think we're looking at a problem of sexism more than anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I think you're exactly right, Paul, that essentially this is feminists saying that the gift of a woman's sexuality is one that upon which a very high price should be set, and a man should pay if he has somehow obtained that gift under false pretenses. I mean, it is really quite an extraordinary sort of almost monetization of the woman's body, or commodification of the woman's body, amongst a bunch of theorists who claim that the commodification of bodies is something that they highly object to. So it is a very, very strange legal move.
An interesting
it's
question.
What these feminists need to do, they need to put a price tag on it.
Yes. What is it that's
What
lost?
is your vagina worth for 15 minutes? Let's get a price out, put that on there. And if it's worth $50 or whatever, I mean, well, some of these women, they think it's worth $5 million. But if it's worth $50, fine, make the guy shell out $50. He told you he made $100K when he only made $30K. He just you wouldn't have slept with a guy that made less than $100K. So he owes you $50 for the use of your vagina for 15 minutes. We can work out a deal.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's more like it. That's more like it, because it's not rape. It's just not rape.
Yeah, the deep desire amongst so many of these feminists to call all sorts of things rape is just, it's amazing to me.
It is.
It is
Yeah.
amazing. And they'll never stop. they've gotten actually way too much. I remember it was probably 10 years ago. Feminists came out with birth rape. I don't know if you guys are familiar with
What?
that.
What?
That
No.
yes, a woman had been in to see her OBGYN. She went into labor. They had to do an emergency C-section because her life was in danger.
Right.
She hadn't given qualified consent to that, so they considered it a form of rape.
What?
And they wanted to establish birth rape. I wrote an article about it when it happened.
Wow.
That's crazy.
It's on ABFM. I think the title is Birth Rape.
Wow.
They're serious about all this.
I
The
mean,
only
haven't there
rape
been
that's
cases?
going on here is the rape of our intelligence.
What's the alternative? Let her die?
Yeah.
God.
Oh,
Of course,
and there were
Go ahead.
there were cases of men being charged who had given like artificial resuscitation to a drowning victim who were also charged with some kind of sexual assault or sexual harassment or something. I mean, yeah, just unbelievable.
And then they released a study showing that men were now hesitant to administer CPR to women who were in respiratory distress because they were afraid of the outcome. Way to go, feminists. You guys are just as brain dead as you can be.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I think that's probably as far as we can go with these stark stories.
I do want to say before we close one more time, guys, and I see this all the time, guys talking about the hot, crazy matrix, and guys talking, well, I like a woman that's a little on the crazy side because the sex is so good. You fuckers are out of your minds.
Really,
you are literally out of your minds to have that kind of attitude about sex with potentially dangerous people. Because trust me, we hear from these guys all the time.
Yeah, man. Don't go for looks. Go for character. You know? A little bit of looks is good, but not too much. Too much, you're sunk. Oh my gosh. I've seen it over and over
One of the guys
again.
in our groups one time said something I thought was tremendous and profound. He said a woman had asked him, don't you want to be loved? And he said, hell no, I want to be respected.
Yeah. That's it.
Just some food for thought.
That's a man's path. Respect and admiration. Yeah.
And crazy hot women.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And it's like, it's involuntary. It's automatic. When some really hot woman shows interest in you, it's almost impossible. It's like the sirens, you know, what was this guy on the ship tied himself to the mast?
In the Odyssey.
Yeah, it's like,
Odysseus.
It's very difficult. Yeah. It's very difficult, guys. So be careful. Judge by character. You want a partner, you know, not a model. Anyway, are we finished?
I think we are.
And what happened at the end?
Well, we say something.
Yeah, what is it?
What is it?
We are
good.
I thought you were going to not say anything. Oh, God.
My timing was a little off.
In the evening,
all right, let's start all over.
We got fun. Okay. Go ahead.
We'll start all over.
Go ahead.
Welcome to Regarded Men, where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die.
Yeah.
We got 3 stories.
On that note, you all take care. It's been fun.
Take care.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.